Hey, Henry. Wait, now.
Hey, I know, don't rub it in. Don't rub it in. Last one. Don't rub it in. I don't want to hear it.
Here we go. This meeting of the Starkville Board of Aldermen will now come to order. Please rise for the saying of the Pledge of Allegiance to be followed by a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, you have before you a copy of the modified written agenda. Are there any proposed revisions to the agenda as written? Alderman Corey.
Mayor, first I'd like to put the minutes from April 26th and the minutes from May 7th on consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Corey is to place the approval of the minutes of the recess meeting of April 26, 2013 of the Board of Aldermen as presented. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Did you have corrections?
Yeah, to both.
All right. The minutes from the April 26, 2013 Board of Aldermen recess meeting and the regular meeting of May 7, 2013, both as corrected by the city attorney on the consent agenda. Alderman Corey, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objections? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, those matters have been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Corey, do you have further proposed revision?
If it's the will of the board, I would actually like to move item D, the minutes of June 4th, to the next meeting to give the city attorney more time to review.
All right, proposed revision from Alderman Corey is to postpone consideration of item 4D, the consideration of the minutes of the regular meeting of June 4th, 2013 of the Board of Aldermen to the next regular meeting of the Board of Aldermen. Alderman Corey, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Saying none, that matter has been postponed. Alderman Corey, do you have further proposed revision?
One more for consideration for consent. I know a lot of people are here tonight to hear about the historic preservation or proposals that we have before us tonight. And while I am interested in hearing and potentially maybe even moving forward with Nash and Greensboro, I do know there's some issues with Overstreet that need to be addressed, and I don't think we're ready to really consider those yet. So based on that, I would like to consider a motion for consent that we rescind the proposed Overstreet Historic District for redrawing and abolish the 6-month effective period of the current proposal that was before us.
Proposed, all right, let's see.
Reduced it to writing.
Yeah, I've reduced it to writing.
So this is an act you're going to add to the agenda in conjunction with striking the public hearing and the consideration of
Well, we
Overstreet.
need to call for the public
Right.
hearing to see if anybody wants to speak in light of this proposed motion, just like we would on a rezoning that would go through on consent.
Okay, all right, so let me give a shot at teeing all of this up.
Okay.
What we'll have is a motion that would be added to the agenda, and I will read that motion in a second. In addition to that motion being added to the agenda, the two items dealing with the Overstreet District, which were a public hearing and consideration of the adoption of the Overstreet District, would be stricken from the agenda. That's just the housekeeping of the agenda plus this motion.
Correct.
Okay.
But anybody who came to speak on
Yeah,
it.
we'll have the public hearing. I'm getting it so we have an agenda to go forward
Sure,
with.
sure.
All right, so the proposed revision from Alderman Corey is to add a new item under board business. That would be item 10R, and I assume you want this to be added on the consent agenda?
Correct.
All right, that item is as follows: to rescind the proposed Overstreet Historic District for redrawing and abolish the 6-month effective period of the current proposal. So that's the proposed revision to add to the agenda. Along with that, item 10H, the consideration of the adoption of the Overstreet Historic District and district standards, along with item 8C, the second public hearing on the adoption of the Overstreet Historic District and district standards would be stricken from the agenda. Alderman Corey, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
All right, at this time, prior to hearing whether the board has any objection to that proposed revision, I will ask for any comments of any nature that anyone would like to make on that proposed action. And just to clarify what that is Alderman Corey is proposing that the board take the affirmative act of abolishing the current Overstreet proposal and striking the matters that would have dealt with taking up that matter tonight. That's what that amounts to. All right.
Can I ask a question?
You may.
The city attorney said that we would still be able to make comments tonight about the Overstreet?
Now's the time to do that.
Now is the time. Because
Just to clarify, for due process sake, the motion on the table is to rescind the district and send it back for redrawing. But if you came to talk about it, now's your chance to be heard about it.
And I will be in very short. This is my house. This is 403 East Gillespie Street. It was built in 1905. The first street commissioner of Starkville was the person who built it, Mr. Davis. I have been before the board of zoning before, and I was told, and this is not a direct quote, you already have apartments in your neighborhood. Why do you care what happens to your neighborhood? I do care, and there are many people in my neighborhood who do care, who do have historic houses. And when I look at what's happened over there about CBS, and I see many of the houses that are being destroyed, I think of what might happen to my neighborhood. This is a plea for you, as you redraw it, to think of those who do live there now, who do care for their home. If you look at my house now, the person living there does not have on a long dress. There's been a room that's been added. This little boy here came as an old man, and they added another place over here. But mostly it's the same. I did have to replace the railings, and the code of Starkville told me I had to raise them. Had nothing to do with the historic district. We live by rules, and we follow them. But I hope you as a board will think about us and the Overstreet District, those of us who want to protect what we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Caldwell. Do we have any further comments on the proposed action to rescind the consideration of the Overstreet District this evening? Any further comments? Yes, ma'am. And please state your name and your residence.
My name is Kim Stevens. I'm at 400 Hogan Street in the Overstreet District. I'm certainly glad you're taking it off the table today, but I'd like to see you take it off the table completely. I live on a street, Hogan Street. There are about 14 houses. 7 of them might be considered historic. 7 of them are brand new. They've all been altered, so none of them actually would be considered historical in the proper sense of the word. But I guess what I'd like to say, since you're going to be considering the other areas as well, is that, you know, when the occasion presents itself for a government on any level to consider taking the rights away from individuals and allocating them to any government agency of any kind, you need to think really long and hard and make sure that the action is absolutely necessary. Is it safety, health, welfare? Exactly what is the city going to get that we don't know about if you have these historical districts, whether they're redrawn or not? I don't see that the benefits are going to outweigh the fact that you're pretty much arbitrarily taking away property rights from people. So I would hope that as a government body, you consider what you were elected to do, and I don't think that health, safety, and welfare is considered in any of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Are there any further comments on the proposed action to rescind the consideration of the Overstreet District? Any further comments?
My name is Sandra Poe. I live at 111 East Gillespie Street. And I would just like to say that I think that this is a very appreciated move. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Poe. Are there any further comments on rescinding the consideration of the Overstreet District? Any further comments? Any further comments? Any further comments? All right, seeing none, that will conclude the public hearing and establish due process as the city attorney has recommended. At this time, I will hear any objection from the members of the board. Alderman Vaughn?
We're not through with the consent.
What now?
We're not through with the consent, right?
Right, yeah, the proposed revision is to place those matters which effectively rescind that from consideration on the consent agenda. Is there any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, your agenda is so revised. Alderman Cord, do you have further proposed revision?
That does it for me.
Further proposed revision. Alderman Vaughn.
Mr. Mayor, good evening, board. Upon the board being F, G, and H, I would love to table all three of those because I made a statement. We need to give the homeowners the privilege. I said before, we should pass a petition out to the homeowners and give them the chance and opportunity to make this decision instead of we making the decision. I would like to see F, G, and H table and give them the privilege to make this decision themselves because it's not a decision I feel like that we should be making for them. They know what best needs in their neighborhood. Do any of your board members live in any of these neighborhoods? Do any of your board members live in any of these neighborhoods? Why are we trying to make a decision for somebody else in their neighborhood and we don't even live there ourselves?
All right, the proposed revision from Alderman Vaughn. Alderman Vaughn, item H has already been stricken from the agenda, so the proposed revision would be to strike item F and item G from the agenda. Those matters are as follows: the consideration of the adoption of the Greensboro Street Historic District and District Standards, and the consideration of the adoption of the Nash Street Historic District and the District Standards. Alderman Vaughn, is that your proposed revision?
That's my proposed provision.
Do I hear any objection?
Objection.
Alderman Dumas has objected. Alderman Vaughn, do you have further proposed revision?
Yes, sir. On the board business, I, J, K, L, and M. I want to table those because there's no vacancy. Those position doesn't come vacant to June the 30th. And I would like to table all those positions.
Proposed revision from Alderman Vaughn is to strike items I, J, K, L, and M from the agenda. And those items are as follows. And was it I, J, K, L, and M, or just J, K, L, and
J, K,
M?
L, and M.
I, J, okay. Those items are as follows. Report from the City Clerk Finance Director Taylor Adams regarding the Parks Commission audit and the fiscal implications of the findings. Consideration of making appointments to vacancies on the Park Commission. Consideration of making an appointment to the Planning and Zoning Commission for Ward 4. Consideration of making appointments to the Municipal Election Commission. Consideration of making an appointment to the Historic Preservation Commission. Alderman Vaughn, is that your proposed revision?
That's it.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Alderman Dumas, do you object?
I've got an objection to I. On J, K, L, and M, I do believe we've got a legal opinion pending that we probably need to hear about.
I do think it would be proper to table those items until the vacancies actually become vacant.
All right, so with Alderman Dumas's objection, the revision stands at striking items J, K, L, and M from the agenda. Is there any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, those matters have been stricken from the agenda. Alderman Vaughn, do you have further proposed revision?
Yes, sir. An item where is M at, where's the Historic Preservation Commission, I would like to call for a public hearing on June the 2nd to repeal the ordinance that create this Historic Preservation Commission.
All right, Alderman Vaughn would like to place on the agenda a new item. That would be item 10S. And that is calling for a public hearing
July the 2nd.
to, do you want to repeal
Ordinance, right.
the districts, or do you want to repeal the enabling ordinance for the Historic Preservation Commission?
That's correct.
All right, calling for a public hearing to repeal the enabling ordinance for the Historic Preservation Commission. Alderman Vaughn, is that your proposed revision?
Yes, it is.
All right, do I hear any objection? Any objection, any objection, any objection? That matter's been added as item S to the agenda. Alderman Vaughn, do you have further proposed revisions?
Department of Business, Code Enforcement A, move to consent.
All right, the proposed revision from Alderman Vaughn is to place item 11B1A, the request for authorization to declare liens on the dilapidated properties with the Chancery Clerk for the purpose of selling said properties for reimbursement and finding a fact in accordance with Mississippi Code annotated 21-19-11 subsection 3 that the debt is owed as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Vaughn, is that your proposed revision?
Yes, it is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Vaughn, do you have further proposed revisions?
Number 3, planning. Move B and C to the consent.
The proposed revision from Alderman Vaughn is to place items 11, 3B, and C onto the consent agenda. Those items are as follows: the approval of the preliminary plat for the Homewood Suites, item S-2-13. Wait, what is that? What's the S-2-13?
Just the cause number for that item.
That is the item number?
I
No, the
believe
next
it
one's S, oh, okay, it's it. I got you. As presented to the consent agenda, and the approval of the preliminary plat for the mill, item S-3-13, to the consent agenda. Alderman Vaughn, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection, any objection, any objection? Seeing none, those matters have been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Vaughn, do you have further proposed revisions?
Item E, number on the Finance Administration, number 2, removed from consent.
The proposed revision from Alderman Vaughn is to, well, actually, it's not a proposed revision. That item's just removed from the consent agenda. Item 11E2, a report of receipts and expenditures for the period beginning May 31st, 2013, in accordance with 21-35-13 of the Mississippi Code, to be removed from the consent agenda. So that item will be on the open agenda. Alderman Vaughn, do you have further proposed revisions?
H, personnel. Move 1 and 2 to consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Vaughn is to place items 11H1 and 11H2 on the consent agenda. Those are the approval to promote Ronnie Betts to fill the vacant position of lead foreman in the Water Sewer Department, and the authorization to advertise to fill the position of line foreman in the in the Water Sewer Department, both as presented to the consent agenda. Alderman Vaughn, is that your proposed revision?
Yes, it is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, those matters have been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Vaughn, do you have further proposed revisions?
No, sir.
Any further proposed revisions?
I've got a few. Chris, were there any issues with May 21st minutes that need to be
I wasn't here for that meeting. I'd rather not. I'd rather abstain.
been for? I've got one more. The two new items. Q under board business, consideration of approval of the resolution for the tax abatement on behalf of Medical Development Properties LLC. I'd like to move that to consent.
What are those?
10, under board business Q, the new items.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place item 10Q, the approval of the resolution for tax abatement on behalf of Medical Development Properties LLC, as per the board order dated May 17, 2011, on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further proposed
I do,
revision?
under planning, the BOAA item for our Campus Haven, I'd like to place that on consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place item 11-3A. Oh, you've got a public hearing,
We'll
so
ask
we'll.
if anybody wants to be heard on that.
Yeah, I'll take it after I make sure I've got the call right. Place following matter on the consent agenda, and you will have an opportunity to be heard before this goes before the board for consent. And that is the approval of the recommendation by the Board of Adjustment and Appeals for BOAA item 13-04, a request from Clyde Pritchard for setback variance for Campus Haven from 25 feet to 8 feet as presented. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Is there anyone here now wishing to make comment on that matter? Anyone here wishing to make comment on that matter? Is there anyone wishing to make comment? Seeing no one, is there any objection from the members of the board to that being placed on the consent agenda? Any objection, any objection, any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further proposed?
I do. The last one under Electric Department, item 3, request approval of the emergency purchase of replacement truck. Move to consent.
Proposed revision from Alderman Dumas is to place item 11D3, the approval of the emergency purchase of a replacement truck from state contract as presented on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, is that your proposed revision?
It is.
Do I hear any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, that matter's been placed on the consent agenda. Alderman Dumas, do you have further proposed revisions?
I do not.
All right. Are there any further proposed revisions from the members of the board? Any further proposed revisions from the members of the board? Any further proposed revisions? Seeing none, a motion to approve the agenda as revised is in order.
So move.
Motion has been made by Alderman Corey to approve the agenda as revised. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Dumas. Alderman Corey, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. You now have before you the approval of the consent agenda. Is there any objection to the approval of the consent agenda as revised? Any objection? Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda as revised is approved. And you now have before you the consideration of the minutes of the recess meeting of May 21st, 2013. Did you have corrections to these?
They're clean.
Okay. Discussion.
I move approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Corey to approve of the minutes of the recess meeting of May 21st, 2013 of the Board of Aldermen of the City of Starkville as presented. Alderman Corey, is that your motion?
Yes.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Dumas. Alderman Corey, do you wish to speak on the merits?
Do not.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Measure clearly passes. Oh, and any abstentions? All right, by a vote of 5 in favor with 0 against and 1 abstention, this measure passes. All right, and that will carry us to announcements and comments. I have 2 tonight. One is a scheduled comment, and the other is just a comment that I will make. First, I'd like to introduce our newest employee, Marcus Gillespie. It is my pleasure to welcome Marcus Gillespie as our new customer service technician for the Starkville Electric Department. Marcus is originally from Starkville and is a graduate of Starkville High School. He attended East Mississippi Community College, where he studied electronic technology. Before joining the City of Starkville, Marcus worked at SemiSouth. Marcus and his wife Nicoya are the proud parents of Mariah and son Nicholas. Marcus and his family are members of Temple of God Missions. In his spare time, he enjoys traveling, writing, music, and teaching his Bible class. Please join me in welcoming Marcus. And I would be remiss if I didn't say a few words tonight, since this is the very last board meeting of a term. It's really hard for me to believe that it has been 4 years. And every other week for 4 years now, in addition to other special occasions, the 8 of us have been sitting together. And there have been times of triumph. There have certainly been some trials in that time together. But I just want to say a brief word to the 7 of you that it has been nothing short of a pleasure for me. And this is, oh yeah, excuse me, we only have 6 here today, but let's go to Alderman Perkins as well. It's, I guess as I was thinking about this, the best way I know to put it is for the rest of our lives, wherever any of us go, there is one unique thing we will share with each other, and that is that we have shared this experience with each other. And through the good times, through the difficult times, I personally am a better person than I was 4 years ago. And I want to thank each and every one of you for your contributions in that for me. And it's been a pleasure. Any further comments for the members of the board? Alderman Corey.
I'll be brief. I just want to thank everyone for the last 8 years. It'll be interesting. I've spent more of my adult life in public office than out, and so I'm actually looking forward to seeing things from y'all's side of the table for a change. And I just want to let the new board know that I will be here for the first meeting to congratulate them and look forward to seeing what they do for the next 4 years.
Yeah, and you use the word triumph and experience, and I think experience is probably the best way to put what the last 4 years have been. It's been an incredibly enlightening experience, despite the differences I've had with some of you, with either the agreements I've had with some of you. It has been a good experience, and I look forward to, I saw Scott walk in earlier. Scott and I were sitting in the same chairs 4 years ago, and he's here today, and I wish him all the best of luck coming forward, and I know that the person sitting here, I have full faith and credit in. But interestingly, 4 years ago, I remember Dan speaking, and Dan spoke about the department heads, and I thought it was kind of a cliche thing of just kind of a parting, you've got great department heads. But I can say now that when you look at what this city has in resources, and you look at what this city is in terms of space, in terms of people, and in terms of demand, despite all the good that I think we've done, the challenges that I think we've had, I think the greatest triumph is what our day-to-day operational people do with the resources they have. And I couldn't agree more with what Dan said 4 years ago. And if I can say anything with the people that are coming in and taking these positions over the next 4 years, is that you've got some really good, some really talented, and some really dedicated people that we all know and we all appreciate, but that can't be said enough to the citizens to understand what these individuals do with what they have on a daily basis. So what we do couldn't have been done without the day-to-day workmanship, and I don't know what word to use, but it's been a real pleasure, and I can't say enough to each of them. Some of them I've gotten to know a lot better. Some of them, unfortunately, I've not spent enough time with, but I do appreciate it, and it has been a good experience. So, thank you.
And I'll say the same thing. It has been a very interesting 4 years for sure, and it's I've enjoyed the time up here, and I thank all the department heads and all the employees for all they've done the last 4 years, and it's and David's here tonight, and I hope, and I'm sure he will take it as seriously as I've taken it over the last 4 years. Sometimes way too seriously, but it's been a good 4 years, and most of all, there's two little people here in the audience tonight that I want to thank for letting me be gone every Tuesday night and taking phone calls all the time, I want to thank them, and we've already got great plans for the mariachi band on Tuesday nights. So we're gonna be enjoying our Tuesday nights for sure. So I want to thank them most of all. So.
Alderman Sistro.
And I'm going to, when you're the last speaker, everything's been said for the most part, but I'm going to echo that the department heads are what make the city run. And we sit up here every other week, as the mayor has mentioned. We talk from time to time, but the department heads are who make our city run. And I agree with Alderman Dumas. I remember Mayor Camp talking about what good department heads we have. They were good 4 years ago. They're good now, and I hope y'all will continue to do what you've done over the last 4 years for us to help keep things moving as smoothly and as efficiently as they have, and frequently without the resources that you need to do the very best job that y'all can do. And I know that if you had more resources, you could do more. I would also encourage the new board to keep the interest of our community at heart. Individual things are individual things, but when you're sitting up here, you are representing the community as a whole. You will not hear from the community as a whole. You will hear from a very few people, but educate yourselves about the issue. It's enlightening when you learn this much about city government. You will have an appreciation for it that you can't develop otherwise, but it is an awesome responsibility, and I'm a better person for having had an opportunity to do it. I think I've made a difference. I think generally it's been a positive difference, and I'm sure that the new board will be saying those same things 4 years from now.
My turn? Oh.
It's all been said, Ben.
I guess the last thing I'd add to that is somebody would always ask us when we go to the conference or something, is, what is it about y'all's board? I mean, it is a statewide, people have heard about Starkville growing, and it's an interesting time to be living in Starkville. And with that growth comes change, and with that change comes friction and figuring out where you're going to go next and creating growth and creating a forward direction. But the one thing I always told people is I said at the end of the day, we could all talk to each other as friends, and that has really impressed me. We didn't always agree, but at the end of the day, I felt like we could, if you needed something, we could call each other. So I know everybody on this board, not a doubt in my mind, they're going to be successful in whatever they do, and I wish you the best of luck, and I hope you keep coming up here and watching. And
No. Yeah, let me add to that. I'm not like Richard. I'm not going to be here on the first day. And Eric, you stole my thunder completely, because I completely am remiss to the person sitting next to your beautiful children of the fact that, if there's anything that I am, I tell people the good thing about me is that I'm passionate for government, but it's the good thing and the bad thing about it. And I can't say enough about my wife and my family, who have been here through thick and thin with me. Ironically, today we found out that our 5th child will be a boy. So, Eric, if those girls are yours when we're at the mariachi place, start messing with my boy. Or better yet, any girls or any boys messing with my girls. But I can't say enough about that, because the dedication for all of us. I mean, Henry and I talk a lot, because if I have a lot of children, Henry's got more children than me. So we this end of the table has a good time talking about that. But enough can't be said of the dedication of families and wives and everything that are here, and what these individuals go through. And I have a great example of what that dedication is, because when you do something like this, it's not just Tuesday night. It's not just during the day. So I can't say enough to that for you and everybody else. So.
Yes, I'm last. It's been a great experience, because we all came from different backgrounds. I mean, and it's been a real great experience to get to know you all and see what we had to do for the city of Starkville, and not for ourselves, but the decision that we made. I try to make every decision I make glorify God, and I know I can go home and rest. But sometimes it'd be hard to rest, because you wonder, did I make the right decision? And you try to make the right decision to benefit everybody, but sometimes that decision don't be made. And then the repercussion will come behind that decision. But the best thing I just can say, I thank you all for, even though the decision that we made, we didn't please everybody, but we did take Starkville another step forward. And I say to the new board, please, don't fail to go to your conference. Go to your conference. It will teach you a whole lot, and you will learn a lot at these conferences to how to handle a lot of these things that we are faced with. And you will rest at night a little better if you go to these conferences and learn something. You will rest a little bit better. And I thank the city of Starkville for, giving me another 4 years. And I'm still gonna try to do the very best that I can do at every decision I make, glorify God. And I know I will make the people of Starkville very happy if that would happen. Thank you guys for enjoying working with you. I know we didn't always be on the same page, but like you say, at the end of the day, we still had a hello and goodbye. And that's meant a whole lot.
Are there any further comments? Any further comments? Seeing none, we'll move to citizen comments. At this time, any citizen wishing to make comments may do so by coming forward, introducing yourself, and you'll be recognized to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. And we do have public hearings scheduled for the historic preservation matters, so if your comments are related to historic preservation, I ask you to wait until the public hearing.
Good evening to the mayor and board. My name is Alderman Ward 7. Want to recognize Vice Mayor Sid Trump and Alderman Vaughn.
Thank you.
Mr. Turner?
At the last meeting, our citizens said that they couldn't hear me, so I would have to repeat the two things that I said at the last meeting in the building department. The first one was, it's getting hot now, and we don't want none of our city employees to pass out or collapse trying to serve us best they know. And to that, the citizens feel like that they need a pay raise at everything that they try to please and do the best they can for the city of Star. Boardtown Village, with everything, the redistricting and all that stuff, and they was displeased now if just do affidavit ballot for them, because a lot of them do not have cars, they cannot get around. We don't have transit service, and they don't want to get out trying to walk nowhere to do their civic duty. All right, and that from board time. All right, another issue is the mental health have took a hit. All right, I'm a client of community council, and we really are in a situation now. But I ask the public and everyone that we have people out there that have problems. And one thing, please don't do a mental patient that have been to Whitfield in the Marine Hospital. Don't try to taser them because their body is immune to that, and it might hurt. They don't feel it. And so, but continue to pray for the mental health, and hope that we can get ourselves back on footing. But right now, we kind of struggling.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Any further citizen comments? Mr. Burnham?
I'm Isla Burnham from Ward 2. I'd like to say thank you to the four that are leaving, especially to Sandra, who has been my alderman, for her counsel and her guidance. I came here tonight to address the issue of the appointments to the Park Commission. There are 3 vacancies. I know that this has now been delayed. I understand that applicants are still coming in. I noticed in the paper today that the mayor said that he did not foresee more than 3 vacancies on the Parks Commission. I will be back in July pressing for the removal of the remaining members of the Park Commission, and with their replacement with qualified individuals. I think that what we have left and what we've seen is a situation of incompetency, inefficiency, and they have given cause for their removal. There are some very able applicants, and I hope that there will be more. And another issue with regard to the Park Commission and the parks. On Father's Day, a friend and I went to see our new shining, crowning splash pad. We went there at 12:30 on Sunday afternoon. It was pure trash and garbage. I would not have allowed my grandchildren to be there. There was, garbage cans were overflowing, there was trash all over the ground, there was mud. It was not a crown jewel. It was an eyesore. Something needs to be done about that. This is a reflection of the Park Commission and not on our sanitation department. So I hope that something can be done about that. I went down, earlier in the spring, I went to a cherry blossom tree planting at the Sportsplex. In fact, Alderman Perkins was there, in which a young lady read a poem about planting trees. This was in commemoration of the cherry trees given to the Washington, D.C., and are planted there in Washington. And we went through a process. That tree is dead. I don't know whose fault that is. That tree is dead. There was very little attention given. Does it fall to the Park Commission? Does it fall to who? At any rate, something needs to be done about that. There is still poison ivy that rims the perimeter of McKee Park. Something should be done with that, particularly with all of the people that will be coming in for the baseball clinic or the baseball games or such, or the softball, the kids programs. Something needs to be done of that. There's a lot that the Park Commission can do. There are qualified people who want to serve. There are people who will see that it's done and done right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burnham.
And I'll be back in July, God willing.
Do we have any further citizen comment?
My name is Nancy Walsh. I live in Ward 3. I've lived in Starkville for about 5 years now. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine suggested that if I wanted to know what was happening in Starkville, I needed to come to the board meetings. And so for the last couple of years, I've made every meeting that I could, and it has been most enlightening. And I challenge anyone else who wants to know what's going on in town. If you don't know, then come to the board meetings and you will certainly find out. I come tonight to express my appreciation to this board, to Mayor Wiseman, to Ms. Spruill, Mr. Adams, Mr. Latimer, for the work that you have done for this city and for your commitment to it. I have sat through a lot of meetings and listened to things where you agreed and where you disagreed, and as was said a few minutes ago, in the end, you all come together and work. And I truly believe that each of these members of this board has represented their constituents in the city to the best of their ability. I thank those of you who are retiring. I thank you for your service, and I thank you for having the courage of your convictions. And I hope that the remaining members of the board will help the new board members to continue to lead Starkville in a progressive manner. Thank you all for your service.
Thank you, Ms. Walsh. Any further citizen comments? Do we have any further citizen comments this evening? Any further citizen comments? Seeing none, we will now have our only public appearance of the evening, and that is by Mr. Ron Kosman to report on grant efforts related to safe routes to school and the Healthiest Hometown Award.
Good evening. I'm Ron Kosman, and I'm speaking as president of Starkville in Motion. And I wanted to start off by thanking the board for your cooperation, for your assistance, and your patience over the last 4 years. Tonight, I just wanted to highlight some of the accomplishments that we collectively have had in improving the quality of life in Starkville. First of all, I gave you a map of the Lynn Lane multi-use path as just a reminder of that project. It was funded in 2006, and in fact, I mentioned the slow progress to an MDOT official when he was in town, and he actually told me, "You guys are doing great. What you have to do is you have to think in terms of MDOT years, which are sort of like dog years." So I just want to emphasize the fact that we are making progress. The last piece of the puzzle, which is the right-of-way acquisition, is on the agenda shortly. That is the last thing that has to be done before we can actually begin construction on that project. That said, I would like to realize the entire concept of the Lynn Lane multi-use path. To the west, past the Sportsplex, I would still like to see a connection to the Boys and Girls Club along Lynn Lane. I'd also like to see a spur going into McKee Park. And then to the east, we will need to get cyclists from the intersection of Loxley Way and Spring Street onto the MSU campus. And whatever the design solution winds up being, that will take cooperation between the city and the university to make that happen. I also want to highlight the sidewalks that have been funded by the Safe Routes to Schools grant, which we wrote in 2006 as well. We're making slow, I think MDOT years, slow progress on that, but we are definitely making progress. We are slowly creating a safe environment for 4th through 8th graders to walk to their neighborhood schools. I'm excited about MDOT's plans for 182 to finish, but to finish that job, our next Safe Routes to Schools grant that we write will be for the completion of that project, so that that's an entirely safe environment for children to walk to those schools there. And speaking of sidewalks, in our view, it's critical from an economic development standpoint and a health perspective that we have a network of sidewalks for our residents to use. Keep in mind that we're making up for 70 years of not building sidewalks, and so it's going to take quite some time to actually come up with a network that works. We certainly know that our bike lanes and sidewalks on University Drive are being used. We conducted our annual cycling and pedestrian census, and in one 12-hour period, we counted 213 cyclists, 432 pedestrians, and 144 runners, plus 11 skateboards. The good news is that less than 1% of the cyclists were on a cell phone as they were riding. The bad news is that half of the cyclists were not wearing their helmet in the city limits. Which brings me to my last point, and that's education. We conducted a focus group of students who cycled to the university and published that in a peer-reviewed journal, which is in your packet. And we asked them why they did not wear their helmets. And the knee-jerk reaction was, it's too hot, it's inconvenient, I forget about it, I don't want helmet hair. But after discussing it with them for a while, it came down to, deep down inside, they actually believe that they're not going to crash. They just simply do not think that even though they're in an urban environment, that's not going to happen. And so that gets back to the issue of education. We need to be educating them. So, in summary, we look forward to extending the Lynn Lane multi-use path into McKee Park, past the Boys and Girls Club, and to the east, extending onto campus. We need to write a Safe Routes to Schools grant for sidewalks along 182 to serve Henderson and Ward Stewart. And finally, we need to educate cyclists, drivers, walkers, and runners about the rules of the road and how to share the road. So I want to thank you for your service for the last 4 years. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you, Mr. Cosman. All right, that will conclude public appearances and take us to public hearing. We're in public appearances. These are previously scheduled comments. We're about to be in the public hearings on the Historic Preservation District. The next matter that you have before you is the second public hearing on the adoption of the Greensboro Street Historic District and the district standards. Dr. Fazio, would you like to introduce the matter? And Dr. Fazio is the chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. Yeah.
I have little to say. There are two issues. One is the historic districts themselves, Nash Street and Greensboro Street, and the other is the standards for Starkville Historic District, which have to be approved in order for any district to be administered. So those are really the two issues at hand. Last time, at the previous public hearing, there were comments from the board about the neighborhoods actually coming forward with petitions. And I think I heard that from Alderman Vaughn again tonight, and that's exactly what they're going to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fazio. Are there any questions or comments either for Dr. Fazio or for each other prior to hearing public comments from the members of the board?
I've got a pretty specific question while I was thinking about something. There was a gentleman that came that spoke about Brownsville Station, but that was in the Overstreet district, right?
That's correct.
With us being basically essentially tabling that or redrawing the district, is he able, what's he gonna have to do in the meantime? I know he's getting ready for some development. Is that something we'd have to exempt him if we thought?
Alderman,
My motion included to rescind the 6-month period.
So he's gotta wait 6 more
No,
months?
no.
Okay.
I rescinded that so that
Okay.
there, like it always was now.
Okay.
that matter now has no force or effect until a subsequent proposal
Okay.
would be made. Alderman Carver.
One more thing about, the Greensboro falls into my ward, but, I thank everybody, and I know there's been a group of, citizens that have gone out and they've surveyed each one of the property owners and gotten their opinion, but, it's things like this that, engage at the community or as a whole, or in this district, in this instance, everybody in the Greensboro district, but, I'm gonna say, as of this minute, I'm still not made up, as an elected official, I always fall back on, if it's not a moral conviction or something like that, that I always would do what my constituents want me to do. In this case, it is a supermajority, it's gonna, kind of conflicts with some of my personal views. So like I said, at this moment, my mind's still not made up. So if it's a night that you think that, you want your opinion to be said on this one, I definitely will take, use this opportunity to get up and speak on it, because I'm not made up right now. I wouldn't be in favor of Overstreet, and I'm probably not in favor of Nash Street. I'm going to go on and say that now, but Greensboro, I'm not made up on my mind yet. So, I appreciate any and all comments if y'all got something to say to us on this. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from the members of the board?
Thank you,
Alderman
Dr.
Ball.
Fazio. I just want to tell Dr. Fazio, thank you very much.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? All right, seeing none, we're going to move into the public comment phase of the public hearing. And I'm going to conduct this a little differently than we usually do. We're going to stick with the same basic format where we'll hear in alternating fashion from a speaker for and a speaker against. Each speaker will have a maximum of 3 minutes, each side a cumulative total of 15 minutes. Since this is a matter that is so property specific, I'm going to ask, with respect to each of these public hearings, that property owners within those districts come forward and speak first. And then after all property owners from those districts have been heard, we'll hear general comments about historic preservation district as proposed. So please come forward as you do and introduce yourself and state your address so it'll be clear for the record where you live. At this time, is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Greensboro Street Historic District?
Hello, my name is Jamie Mixon, and I do live on Greensboro Street.
I'm Jim Geeson. I live on Greensboro Street.
And we are holding the results of the survey that Ben Carver made reference to. And we went ahead with this survey. Actually, I had a conversation with Ben at the last hearing and asked him what it would take for him to support the Greensboro district passage. And he said 50% plus one. So we took him at his word. And we also listened to Mr. Vaughn as well, who said, wouldn't it be smart if we put this to the people and natural property owners within the district? So what we did, and what you will find in your packet, it should be sitting in front of you, is that we made a good faith effort to contact every single owner within our proposed local district. And there are 46 parcels of property within the district. And what we found was, and we delivered this by hand and also by mail, and what we found, the numbers coming back to us, we had 30 who replied in support of the passage. We had 4 who replied no, and we had 1 who replied indifferent. So they had a choice. We gave them a sheet of paper for each parcel of land that they owned, or property that they owned, and they could say that they were for it, against it, or they were indifferent about it. And so those are the results that we had. We had 11 who did not reply or could not be reached, and we do have several elderly neighbors who don't even live in Starkville anymore, and we did, I have to say that we had trouble reaching a few, just a handful of the property owners within that. So yes, you do have the results of the survey. It's at least 65%. It's a super majority. And Greensboro Historic District feels very strongly, according to the property owners within it, that they would like to live within the ordinance and also within the standards as they have been presented and proposed.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon and Mr. Geeson. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Historic District? Dr. Crosscat.
Thank you. Now, if your minds are already made up or your vote's already promised, then this hearing's a sham, but I think that's not the case. Democracy isn't letting people say their piece and then do what you please. It's getting the input of the citizens and then responding to it. Now, last hearing, there was no clear consensus on the Greensboro Street Historic District. What would be necessary would be to present a balanced presentation of the pros and the cons of the proposed ordinance, both sides, with both sides agreeing that these are the pros and cons, and have that returned to a neutral party. That wasn't the case in this survey we just heard about. In fact, that survey would earn any student of political or social science a failing grade. I think you've really got to walk through the neighborhood. It is a beautiful place, and it has been for 2 generations with no government interference whatever. I think it's the architects and the historians who are interested in architectural and historical accuracy. But I think what the actual homeowners want is a beautiful neighborhood. That is already taken care of and has been taken care of for a long time by existing zoning and building codes. I know of no architectural horror on Greensboro Street. It's a highly eclectic neighborhood. I don't think there's a single thing you could build or modify that would go against the prevailing style, because there is no prevailing style, and that's part of its charm. Real estate values are in no danger. Last time we heard from sellers and realtors saying, if anything, this would lower things. Now, I know there's studies, but I don't care about New York. I care about Greensboro Street. Tax benefits have been mentioned, but they seem to be modest. According to that very long document, the benefit would not even apply to federal taxes unless you use the home or building for commercial purposes, and that's exactly what we're saying we don't want. It said that new subdivisions can have protected covenants, but what about a neighborhood like Greensboro Street? Well, name me any subdivision where it is said that people, many of whom don't even live in that subdivision, will tell you what your front door can or cannot look like. I mean, that is way too extreme. We have had a lot of objections, and there has not been a single modification of what's being proposed. I think very reasonable compromises are possible. You could have this be advisory. I think that would be best. You could have an opt-in, opt-out. You could apply these restrictions when property changes hands. But to remove key property rights without good cause, I think is undemocratic and inappropriate. I urge you to vote no, or at least come up with some reasonable middle ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Carscad. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Mr. Yates?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Board. I'm Jay Yates. We're at 517 Greensboro. Me and my wife, Amy, we've been there since 2007. Some of you guys may know, I've been in Starkville since 1997, so I'm a transplant. I love it. I call it home now. I'm originally from Natchez, Mississippi. Some of you guys know about Natchez. It's a very historic town. I can tell you for a fact, the 2 neighborhoods I grew up in, one of them was semi-historic. The second one that I grew the majority of my life in, very historic. No restrictions. Those neighborhoods turned into some of the worst neighborhoods in the state. The second neighborhood, Roselawn, made the state paper, and it said, how does a historic neighborhood turn into a gang-ridden, crack neighborhood that was just horrible? That's the place I grew up in. No restrictions. My only point is this. We have a beautiful neighborhood. We want to keep it that way. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm saying that the possibility is there. And I can tell you this, if you guys know me, I'm the last guy that's probably gonna come up and say, please give me more property restrictions and have more government on my back. But I am saying that this is where the rubber meets the road. This is why you guys got elected. This is a very difficult thing to talk about and a difficult thing to do. I think it's the right thing. I think that most of my neighbors that I've spoken with think the exact same thing. Yes, are there gonna be restrictions? Yeah. But we got young folks moving in, having kids, and we wanna have a nice neighborhood. We wanna keep it that way. It's that way now, but who knows what's gonna happen? Starkville's growing. There's a lot of market influences coming in. There's a lot of money coming in. Things can happen. Things can change. This is where the decision has to be made, right here, right now, and I think everybody understands that this is where we're at. So we would like to, like I said, my neighbors that I'm speaking for, I would like to say we would love to speak for the ordinance and pass it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Yates. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Anyone wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Yeah, that lives in it. Let me call one more time for those living there, and then we'll hear from those not living there. Is there anyone living within the Greensboro District that would like to speak against it? Now, is there anyone that would generally like to speak against the Greensboro District?
I'm Kim Stevens, 400 Hogan Street, and honestly, I'm not necessarily against the Greensboro Historic District, depending on the due process that's given and how it's determined. I do think a supermajority of that district should allow it to become a historic district if that's what they choose, but I think it should be by ballot. You know, you can't guarantee that everybody's gonna show up, but we never got the due process of actually getting a notice that this was taking effect. We only got public notices in the paper. We have a zoning change, we actually get something in the mail. I'm not sure if everybody here has actually sat down and read everything that's in there and the penalties that can be imposed on a contractor. I think I understand they can lose their license for 3 years if they do something for a house that hasn't met the standards or hasn't gotten a certificate of appropriateness, much less, gotten the building code. I don't think that everybody has sat down and actually looked at everything in there. I think there could be a great compromise. I think that that area votes for it, fine, but I think you guys as aldermen should sit down and really look at every ordinance, every section of every ordinance and see, do you really think that that's appropriate for the city? And do you think a contractor should lose his license for 3 years if he doesn't fit? I mean, we didn't find it in there. We had to call and look on the website and go through all the sections, and it's an arduous process to find out exactly what's in there. And I just wish you would consider looking at it a little closer. If the folks on Greensboro and folks on Nash Street vote to do that, let them vote for it. If they've got a supermajority, let them do it. But I think you should really understand what they're voting for, and they should understand what every ordinance means to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Greensboro Street District?
Hi, I'm Eddie Keith. I live at 519 Greensboro Street, and I moved here and moved to Greensboro Street knowing it was a historic district. Thought I knew what that meant, found out it didn't mean that much. And I'm very pleased that the board is entertaining this motion to allow this neighborhood to really put into effect some things that will guard the biggest investment I've ever made and ever will make, and I would assume the same is true of most of my neighbors, and that's our home. I understand that there are some complications when you do this. Many of our neighbors in Starkville have covenants in their neighborhoods. We're asking for the same right. And we appreciate the opportunity that city government can give us for us to decide within our neighborhood if we're willing to take on some of those complications and perhaps down the line even assume some additional cost if we have to preserve the integrity of the neighborhood, to preserve the history of this community, and to preserve our individual investments. I ask for your support for this and for this opportunity for this neighborhood to govern itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Key. Anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Anyone now wishing to speak?
From outside?
Yes.
I'm Johnny Buckner, and my wife and I are moving into my childhood home on 400 South Washington Street. The nice thing about Covenant is that you have the opportunity to be in that if you want to. You can buy a house in an area that has a covenant. But it's challenging to me to think that a person would be forced to be in a covenant. And this is actually stronger than a covenant, it's a law. And I know when I think about, I've been pondering a lot, the eminent domain, when land can be taken but you're paid for. This is actually more challenging to me than that, because some rights can be taken from us without any compensation for it. And I think my suggestion would be that you do treat it like a covenant. If there are people that want to be in that covenant, they can sign up for it. If they don't want to be in it, they don't have to be in it, or they don't have to buy it. But to have the government force that on us is a challenge to me. I know I'm not in that district. I'm actually from the Overstreet area, but I thought if Greensboro had been taken off the agenda, I would sure like to think that one of them would stay with me and present these feelings about just the whole idea of historic district. And probably the most challenging part is the standards. They just seem, we've got a great city code that can, I mean, it's pretty strong from what I understand comparatively across the state. And I think that's enough. So, thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Buckner. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed?
Hey, I'm Anna Limos. I'm at 410 Greensboro. And I've only been in my house for about 6 months. I'm new to Starkville, but I've lived in several historic neighborhoods in my life. The house I grew up in was 250 years old. I lived in Savannah, just a lot of areas that had great historic neighborhoods. And I was just really surprised when I moved here that we didn't have some sort of standards. So I think it's good for economic development, and I also think it's good for the community and for Starkville in general.
Could you state your last name one more time?
Linhas. Linhas.
Thank you. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Anyone wishing to speak against? Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Anyone wishing to speak against? Seeing no one, is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Greensboro Street District?
I'm Ann Marshall, and I'm a homeowner. I live at 305 Greensboro Street, and I am in favor of the historic standards and the creation of a historic district. I appreciate, as a historian who appreciates historical character in houses and history itself, I appreciate concerns about individual rights. I know that's a cornerstone of our society and of our country, but we also live in a society where things affect people other than ourselves, and the idea that we can opt in and out of the common good might hold water on paper, but it doesn't really hold water in real life. And so I think what we're trying to do on Greensboro is not only for us and for our houses, but for the whole community, create an area that keeps its architectural integrity, it keeps its integrity as property. And so I would like for people to think beyond the individual rights and think about what we're trying to do collectively for our community and for the people of Starkville in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Anyone wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Anyone wishing to speak against? Seeing no one, is there anyone wishing to speak in favor?
I'm Briar Jones. I live at 408 Greensboro Street. And I would like to agree with the vast majority of my neighbors that I believe we need to have these standards in place, understanding that we're going to give away some of our freedoms right now for the protection of the investments that we've made in this neighborhood, and also for the protection of this cultural resource that, whether you vote for this or not, does exist. This is a national register district. This won't change a bit. But it's one of 3 that we have in Starkville, Mississippi. It's a significant cultural resource. So again, I thank you for your consideration of voting in favor of this.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed?
I'm Patricia Buckner. I am a lifelong resident of Starkville, and I grew up at 305 East Gillespie Street, where I now reside. And I have to agree with the last speaker saying that you are voting to give up part of your property rights and your freedom when you say yes to this. I can't understand it, because in my lifetime in Starkville, I have seen nothing but good things come on Greensboro Street. Nothing but good. I've seen nothing bad. And also on Gillespie Street, where I live, on Hogan Street, where friends of mine live. In all of the areas that are proposed historic districts, they're better, not worse. And I don't know why the government has to have a hand in telling us homeowners how that needs to be completed and done.
Thank you, Ms. Buckner. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed historic district? Yes, sir.
I'm J.W. Bruce. I live at 311 Greensboro Street, and I do live in the district. This is my wife. We do live in the district, and I have read the standards. Matter of fact, 3 years ago, we spent almost a year renovating our house, and in the reading of the standards, our renovation was in accordance with those standards. So I understand exactly what it means. And the reason we chose to do that was because we believe in preserving the historic and architectural integrity of our neighborhood. This is a resource that is going to create economic development and value and improve the quality of life of town. As it stands now, we are the only college town in the SEC that does not have one of these districts. The only one. I think it's time for Starkville to embrace the historic nature of this community, and I wholeheartedly support the creation of this district and the standards as it's written. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Ms. Bruce. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Greensboro Street District? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak against? Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Greensboro Street District? Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak for, against, or indifferent to the proposed Greensboro Street District? Anyone wishing to speak? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Dorothy Watson. I've lived in Starkville for 23 years. I'm indifferent on the Greensboro district as to whether you should pass or enforce the district rules, the laws. I just wanted to say I'm really proud of the Greensboro district. It's the most famous street in Starkville. And I just wanted to put in my 2 cents. I am indifferent. I'm not for it. I'm not against it. When we get to my district, I'll have an opinion. But I am really proud of Greensboro, and I think the homeowners have done a wonderful job. And whatever y'all feel like you need to do with the support of your constituents, I hope you will represent the majority. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Watson. And with that, that will conclude the time allotted for this public hearing. And let me just say, that's about as close to hitting the time for a public hearing right on the money as I think we've ever come. So I just thought that was noteworthy. The next matter before you is the second public. Oh, I'm sorry, board comments. Alderman Vaughn.
I'm 60 years old and I've been living in Starkville all my life. I was born and raised in Starkville. Greenboro Street always has been a beautiful street. Our homes always have been up to date, kept up, and I've been here all my life. And that always have been one beautiful street. I don't know why we want to change so much of it, but that's my aspect of it. It always have been beautiful and always have been kept up. And I have been down that street many times in my young life. I'm 60 and I have walked that street many times. And those homes always have been in good condition.
Any further comments from the members of the board? Alderman Carver.
I'd like, I guess, Dr. Fazio or somebody off the commission to come up. I just had a couple questions, so do you want to come up or you want to? These are probably just general questions that everybody in the room might gain advantage from. The first is like, it's been discussed in the enforcement issue or the enforcement side of this. Is there really is there a monetary fine if somebody does work without getting a certificate of appropriateness?
Bear in mind, we actually have 3 things. One would be the districts themselves. One would be the standard, and that's something the commission, we actually hired a professional, worked with him, created the standard. The ordinance, which is the only place where there are consequences like you're talking about, that was passed by the board. So the commission has had nothing to say about that. So I have to yield to the wisdom of the board when they pass that document.
Okay. There was a comment made about a contractor. If he did work that was unapproved or he didn't get a COA, would he lose his license for 3 years?
Rather than try to lift the specifics out of the ordinance, I'm afraid you'd have to go to that ordinance. But bear in mind that if the board decided that you wanted to alter those consequences, I suspect, it would be surprised if this were not the case, that when the board said about the process of creating an ordinance, it wasn't created from scratch. It was probably an ordinance that had been used in another community and was adopted or adapted here, as is typically the case with many ordinances. So whether the board would want to revisit any of those and say some of these are not rigorous enough, some are too rigorous, these are just right, I'm not prepared to comment on the specifics.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot either. I know you're the expert in the room. Also, like, the one that I was looking at was 512 Greensboro, where it's stucco covered walls, and I actually know who lives there, but I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but it kind of stands out different from pretty much all the other houses around. Say that individual at 512 was going to come in and get some renovation done. Would y'all be geared more and guiding them more, do you look at a certain time period of time whenever that house is, the rendering is coming after, or whatever time frame it was made? Do you kind of, if they want to do something, do you have to kind of, how do you guide them to make their house continue to look the way it does?
Well, remember, that's what the standards are for.
Yes.
So there are a lot of specifics in there. So it's not the whimsy of the commission or an individual commission member. We have these things written down. But let's just compare the 2 districts. Nash Street was a planned subdivision. Most of the buildings were built in the same decade. One architect did maybe 4 or 5 of the buildings there. There's there's a great deal of similarity.
Yes, sir.
So let's suppose someone were going to build a new building there. It would have to be very consistent with what was already there. Greensboro Street is, I find various words, a menagerie, a Noah's Ark. It's got many, many, many building styles. So the one you're talking about at 512, that's a unique building in the community. So anything that was done to that, it would be its own reference point. Now, if someone were to say, well, can we smash all the stucco off? Well, I mean, that would destroy the fundamental character of the building. But if someone said, do I have to put stucco on the house next door? Well, clearly not. So Greensboro Street is its own referential system. You look at what's already there, that determines what can change, and the standards deal with specific building styles, which I'm not going to enumerate, kind of architectural history, but it talks about, here's what a bungalow looks like, here's what a colonial revival house looks like, and what are the fundamental characteristics that someone would need to respect if they were going to do any kind of work on their building.
So the commission, you guys would be the one that had the final say if they want to do some kind of drastic alteration to their house.
Yep.
So you would say trying to create a uniformity to make that house stay within the standards of the time period that it was built. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Further questions or comments from the members of the board? Any further questions or comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, that will now conclude this, our second public hearing on the Greensboro Street Historic District. And you now have before you, Dr. Fazio, don't get too far away, the second public hearing on the adoption of the Nash Street Historic District and Standards. Dr. Fazio, would you like to briefly introduce? Dr. Fazio?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nash Street, would you like to offer a brief introduction?
There's a Nash Street resident prepared to go
Perfect.
forward.
Ms. Hamilton?
Hi, I'm Maxine Hamilton. Thank you for hearing me tonight. I live at 108 North Nash. We've been there since April of 1990, and we really like Nash Street. Now, Greensboro did a survey. We did the same form on the survey. I'm going to present it in percentages. We have the supermajority, 64% in favor. We have 14% that I would prefer to say neutral than indifferent. It's fine with them to have it. 14% we were not able to contact. 7% is against. Now, 7% represents one property owner that does not live in the subdivision. Does the board have any questions that you'd like to ask on Nash Street?
Are there any questions or comments for Ms. Hamilton? Any questions or comments from the members of the board? Any questions or comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Hamilton.
Thank you.
Are there any comments from the members of the board prior to hearing from the public? Any comments from the members of the board prior to hearing from the public? Seeing none, we will conduct this public hearing in the exact same fashion as the previous one. I do ask that initially those who own property within the district come forward, and then when it is clear that no one else wishes to speak who owns property within the district, we'll open the floor for general comments. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Nash Street Historic District?
I'm John Hamilton. I live at 108 North Nash Street. Of all 3 subdivisions, someone has went to the effort of putting them on the National Historical Register. I'm going to give you my experience since I moved to Nash Street and we have been put on the National Historical Register. One of the houses is now a parking lot. It's gone. 2 more houses just disappeared. What to be built there, I don't know. So zoning codes doesn't protect you here. People say they will. Building codes are gonna protect you because if the house is not worse, not safe to stand, it doesn't matter what it is, it needs to go. But my point is, if Starkville wants to preserve its historical districts, then a standard needs to be adopted. As time goes, attitudes change, people changes. It's like my house. Something happened to me, my son will put it on eBay tomorrow. No, I mean, that's kind of a joke, but still, you know. So I'm sure that you'll make the decision in the best interest of Starkville. I recommend that we do preserve our historical subdivisions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. Is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed Nash Street district? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Nash Street district? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? All right, now is there anyone wishing to speak in favor that does not live in the Nash Street district? Is there anyone wishing to speak against that does not live in the Nash Street district?
I would like to point out something about these surveys. If you have someone who is in favor of it present you with a survey that has one side of it, the pros without the cons, and then you return that survey to the person that presented it, this is a fatally flawed method. That would be like Parker saying, Tom, I hope you're going to vote, and here's your ballot, and along with your ballot, I've attached all the reasons you should vote for me. Now, please mark it and give it back to me. You know, that's not how it's done. These surveys are just not professional. It may be that a majority of people would be for or against, but you couldn't tell from such a biased approach. You just couldn't.
Thank you, Dr. Corskad. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed Nash Street district?
Actually, about these surveys, a lot of these were mailed and without any kind of opinion attached to, but they were mailed with a self-addressed stamped envelope to be mailed back. So if you look at the survey, and all of you are privy to what the survey is, it is very neutral. It is not leaning one way or another. So I would just like to make sure that's correct.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. And just a general reminder, please don't engage each other. Engage the board. Is there anyone wishing to speak against the proposed Nash Street district? Anyone wishing to speak against?
Might I have 30 seconds remaining?
You may, as long as there's no one else wishing to speak. You can keep it in 3 minutes.
Right. Well, I don't need 3 minutes, but I received one of these surveys. It was not in the mail. It did not have a return address. It did, on a separate page, have all the reasons why I was supposed to be in favor of it. It didn't have any of the drawbacks listed, and I was told to return it to you, Brian. Why did I get one that was different?
Dr. Carskadden, please engage the board.
I wonder why I got one that was different, and I wonder if that had something to do with the fact I was known to be opposed to it. I don't know.
Thank you, Dr. Carskadden. Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed historic district? Anyone wishing to speak in favor?
May I speak again?
You may.
Thank you. In my small neighborhood, I took around the survey to several people. Pete Melby did the other. Any questions that were asked, we had questions asked on the con on it. And since I serve on the commission, I could answer them. And many of them were very satisfied with my answers. So there was a give and take on the pros and cons. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed Nash Street district? Is there anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone now wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak in favor? Anyone wishing to speak for, against, or indifferent to the proposed Nash Street District? Anyone wishing to speak? Anyone wishing to speak?
I'm Johnny Buckner. I have a tickle in my throat here, so I'm sorry. I hope you can understand me. I value the history of our city and of the architecture and have worked to see that developed with property that I own. I think something deeper, and it was mentioned at the last public hearing, is just our community togetherness, being together, having time together. Unfortunately, I hate to see the polarization kind of things happen like this in meetings like this. But I think I would say I'm indifferent in the sense that if there are those that want to join in a covenant or join in to the standards that are being presented, then I think it's great. It's wonderful. If whoever wants to do that should do it. I guess my concern is for any one person that didn't, and I would object to the government being involved in telling more than it already is, telling property owners how they need to develop their property. Thank you for the opportunity to share.
Thank you, Pastor Buckner. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Anyone else wishing to speak on the Nash Street District? Anyone wishing to speak? All right, seeing no one, that will conclude the public comment portion of the public hearing, and we'll hear concluding comments from the members of the board. Are there any concluding comments from the members of the board? Any concluding comments? All right, seeing none, that will conclude this, our second public hearing on the Nash Street Historic District and Standards. And that will take us to a public hearing on the establishment of a redevelopment authority in the city of Starkville. This is the culmination of a couple of years worth of work. Actually, it dates back as far as the Main Street charrette, which was conducted nearly 2 years ago. Many of you may recall the Main Street charrette was made possible by a partnership among the Greater Starkville Development Partnership, the City of Starkville, and a grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission. We had a team of professionals that came into the community and offered insight and ideas as to how to expand and improve the quality of the experience and economic development in downtown Starkville. One of that is typical in the oldest parts of a community that have a tendency to take on blight over time. So the process that this board has undergone to move us towards establishing a redevelopment authority is you appointed a steering committee to establish a redevelopment plan and potential enabling language to establish a redevelopment authority. That steering committee had completed its work last summer, and matter was then heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission. And what you have before you tonight is the final redevelopment authority plan and the enabling legislation that would allow us to have a redevelopment authority so that we would have a board that could then begin the hard work of executing the plan. The redevelopment district as defined in the plan is defined as exactly the same as the form-based code area. And that is, generally speaking, the Highway 182 corridor, the Russell Street corridor, the Lampkin Street and Main Street corridors. If you think about it, the traditional center core of the community, or the oldest part of the community. That encompasses some 472 properties. The consultant that analyzed the area estimates that approximately 30% of the properties in those in that area have some code deficiencies. So that's pretty consistent, probably with what you've observed in the area. There are many properties in that area that are doing very well. There are some that are completely undeveloped, and there are some older building structures and clusters of older building structures that are run the risk of becoming blighted areas if the city is not taking a proactive approach, both with public improvements such as street drainage and sidewalk improvements, and also actively engaging the private sector with exercises like master planning and charrettes that show a vision for how properties can be redeveloped in the future. Are there any questions or comments from the members of the board? Any questions or comments from the members of the board? Seeing none, we will conduct the public comment portion of this public hearing in exactly the same fashion as previously. But since this is not a matter that's strictly related to properties, well, actually, I guess it is because this is a redevelopment district, but it's not placing any additional regulations potentially on any properties. We'll just hear in favor and against. Is there anyone wishing to speak in favor of the proposed redevelopment authority?
I'm Jennifer Gregory with the Greater Starkville Development Partnership, and you guys should have a letter in your packet that I sent to the members of the board and the mayor showing the partnership's support for the redevelopment authority. I served on the steering committee with the mayor and several others, and was able to really learn a lot about the benefits that this authority provides for. And we think that with the revitalization that has happened in the downtown area, that this would provide for only other methods of revitalizing that core area that the mayor spoke of, specifically the Highway 182 corridor. And we think that now is the perfect time, that we're seeing more commerce than ever downtown. We're seeing more restaurants and businesses trying to locate downtown, that this would only help us extend those revitalization efforts off of Main Street and into other areas like Russell Street, like Highway 182, and we support this. The Main Street Association specifically supports this, and we ask for your support as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gregory. Is there anyone now wishing to speak against the proposed redevelopment authority? Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak against? Is there anyone now wishing to speak in favor of the proposed redevelopment authority?
Mayor, I'd like to make a comment. I'm Steve Langston. I've been involved in downtown pretty much all my adult life, since 1970. We have seen, in cooperation with a lot of private business owners and the city through the years, we have been able to pretty much maintain our central business district, and our city is growing and it's continuing to grow, and we're all about that. We do think it's important to maintain the central business district and to keep it alive and vibrant. No matter how large our city grows, there will always be the downtown area, and we've worked hard to try to keep, it's a major place where people attend churches. We've tried to keep most of our public buildings downtown when we can, and I'd like to say that I hope you'll consider voting for this. As Jennifer stated already, we've done a lot, but there's some things we just can't seem to do. We need some other tools, and other communities have done this with great success. Downtown Tupelo is just an example, but there are some other examples across our state, Gulfport, maybe even in Columbus. But this is just another tool in our bag that allows us to market properties as a whole, rather than maybe we have a lot of absentee landowners that aren't here to market their properties and things like that. So we just think it's another tool that will help us continue and expand the redevelopment of the downtown central business district, which includes the areas you mentioned. The Main Street program has recently expanded about a year ago to include University Drive all the way to Highway 12 and down through the Lampkin Corridor and Russell Street to Highway 12. those businesses are all eligible, and most are members now of the Main Street program. So if there's any questions, I don't know that I could answer them, but I would certainly try. But it's just, we feel like it's something that we could use to be even more successful like other communities have used.
Thank you, Mr. Lang.
I did have a question.
Sure.
You're speaking about a tool that this will give you. What exactly is that tool? I mean, what has Tupelo done that you kind of want to see yourself follow in their footsteps?
Well, when you form this redevelopment authority, and it has boundaries, as the mayor mentioned, and you have a commission, it becomes their job to develop these areas and to present it in a favorable light to people who would consider development. It allows them, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it allows them to go to individual landowners and say, look, we got a plan. We're going to bring in some developers, but they need this much acreage, or they need this much square footage. You have this much, but your neighbor has this much, and this neighbor. We're going to come to each one of you and say, what if we could get a plan that involved all properties? Would you be willing to go along with it? And that's just hard to do on an individual basis, and especially when you have absentee landowners. I mean, we try it. We've been trying it, and we've done it a lot through the years, but it's difficult. And you can just enjoy a much higher level of success when you have some group whose intent purpose is to cause that to happen.
And specific to Tupelo, the Fair Park District is the redevelopment district, so that area across from the Bancorp South by the City Hall. And so their real success is because, like Steve says, they have a private group of citizens who are business owners, other interested parties within that area who are advocating for that area, for that district. And they're able to do some things that the community can't, and the citizens can't, or the city can't because of statute and other type things. And so it's been very powerful there, and I know Pascagoula has a very active one, others. So I think Tupelo's got a perfect example of what could be for what was once a blighted area that's now quickly becoming one of their showcase spots.
Where the funding come from, the business owner?
No, it can come from a variety of sources. There can be city funding, there can be private funding, there can be a combination of both. This particular legislation does not do anything in the way of funding. This enables there to be a redevelopment authority, and in the future, decisions would have to be made by both public and private sector as to if and how it would be funded. And let's not get too far adrift from the comments. I know Alderman Sistrunk, you had your hand raised.
My question was similar to Alderman Vaughn's about funding, and particularly how funding impacted the success of Tupelo's redevelopment authority. Tupelo clearly almost always has a much greater source of funds at the city level than the city of Starkville does, and so I think that that's maybe something that to say that this can be as successful in Starkville. We may be working from a different starting point than Tupelo was, and it may be skewing our expectations of what this sort of authority can be. It definitely has potential. It's been talked about for the better part of 2 years now, but it also went by the wayside for about 9 months and was not addressed in any fashion. I think if I have any concerns about supporting this, it is related to the timing of asking for this support. This board is clearly on the way out the door. There will be another board seated here on July 2nd. This is a major policy decision, and if it were something that we had been working on, discussing, like the historic preservation, it makes sense for this board to finish it. But we've not touched this in quite some time, and I think it's we're not making appointments to boards or commissions out of deference to a new board. To me, this falls into that same category. It's really too late for this board to be addressing this policy, and I think it would make more sense to allow the next board to do this. The next board would have to appoint the commissioners, and the success will rise or fall with the appointment of those commissioners. So I just I believe it's just not the right time for this board to take this on.
And I'll make a few comments in response to that, and we'll hear if there are any concluding public comments. You're right, there has been a fair amount of time that has elapsed from the time the Planning and Zoning Commission heard this till now. And that is a result of it having to go through a final legal review at the end of the fall and the early part of the winter, and us being in the middle of an election cycle after that. That's how that happens. I think it's wholly appropriate for this board to take this up, because this board has done 2 years' worth of work on getting this established. And I think it's also appropriate how this board would pass the baton. This board would merely enable there to be a redevelopment authority, and then that enables the next board to put the meat on the bones in terms of seating a redevelopment board, and then beginning to do the work of operationalizing a redevelopment authority and determining how it's going to work. There are many different examples as to how this works. Tupelo and Pascagoula probably represent the polar opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how redevelopment authorities can be successful and be very different. Tupelo, a little more than a decade ago, capitalized their redevelopment authority very significantly. They went and issued a significant amount of bonds and immediately started doing work acquiring properties in a very aggressive manner. That model worked for Tupelo. I can tell you that's not going to be Starkville's model. It's not in the cards politically for this board or the next board to begin allocating a substantial amount of capital to a redevelopment authority. But the good news is the Pascagoula Redevelopment Authority story shows you that a redevelopment authority can be very successful without heavily capitalizing that organization in the early going. Pascagoula very intentionally, in spite of the fact that Pascagoula is a very capital-rich city government, did not initially capitalize their redevelopment authority because they wanted them to go through the work of figuring out what exactly they wanted the redevelopment authority to be and forming the relationships with the business community, which is essential for a redevelopment authority to succeed. Thought being, if you give this redevelopment authority a tremendous amount of money of their own to spend, then it negates much of the need to build the bridge with the private sector community to begin doing the work of public-private redevelopment. And theirs is a great story, as they've had opportunities with Ingalls to do things downtown that have come directly from them having a redevelopment authority and having a group of people that were dedicated to the redevelopment of their downtown, willing to roll up their sleeves, sit at the table, and figure out how they execute a vision. I think that is a much closer model to where we'll be in the early going. And I think it puts a new board in a great position to determine how they want to make those steps to operationalize the redevelopment authority.
Mayor.
Let's finish out citizen comments, and then we'll go back into board discussion. Are there any further citizen comments? Yes.
Charles Henderson. It's hard for me to understand why your last meeting before you go out of office, you'd even want to bring this up when it's been going on for 2 years. I have to agree with Alderman Sistrunk over here. Let the new board decide what they want to do. Why strap them with what you decided to do your last meeting? You only got 2 weeks now before the new meeting, before the new board comes up. Let them vote on the thing and decide whether they want to do that or not. I'm not for or against it, but I think it's the wrong time for this board to be making decisions like this for the next 4 years for the next board.
Thank you, Mr. Henderson. Are there any further citizen comments? Any further citizen comments? Any further citizen comments? Seeing none, that will conclude the public comment portion of the public hearing. Now we hear comments from the members of the board. Alderman Corey.
Well, I mean, I was just thinking, is this time sensitive in some way based on the concerns that Ms. Sistrunk raised? Do you have any concerns with giving deference to the next board and with deciding whether or not to form this?
Yeah, I guess the reason I brought it forward now is what you have at this point represents this board's body of work, and I would like to see this board render a decision on it. The next board will have a new chapter and a body of work to deal with, but I think it is properly the prerogative of this board to render a decision on something that you've worked hard on for 2 years. Alderman Sistrum.
And certainly within our prerogative, as Alderman Perkins, who's not here, would say, and I'll say it on his behalf, we are the board. And so, but I do think this is a very major policy change. There are always things that are going to be handed off from one board to the next. You never get to dot all your T's, dot all your I's, cross your T's, and walk out the door and give the new board a completely clean slate. One of the things that we've worked hard on for the last several months that we're not going to finish, that I'm hoping that the new board will finish, is the implementation of some new employee salary structure. That's vitally important too, and something that this board was tremendously committed to, something that the committee of the Audit and Budget Committee worked diligently on for several months. We're not going to be able to finish that either, and it's going to be up to the next board to make some decision about how they're going to go forward with that. The business of government doesn't stop. It's not a snapshot sort of thing so that it stops and a new board comes in and they start with a whole new agenda. There's work that carries over from one to the next. This is part of that situation where we have something that started, and I think at this point it's appropriate for us to hand it off and let the next board deal with it.
Alderman Vaughn.
I agree with Vice Mayor Sistrom. Scientifically, where's the funding coming from? Scientifically, you saying the city gonna be involved in the funding. Where's the funding coming from the city? But I agree with Vice Mayor. We got 2 weeks. I mean, it's just as urgent that we got to push this now. We have pushed a lot of things. The last few board meetings, we have pushed so much. And this is something that's not urgent. I don't see no sense in that we making a decision on it. We can pass it on to the next board and give them a chance, because when we came in, we didn't come in with a kill slate. We came in with debt. Just don't get this next board debt. Let's think about them. I mean, we come in with 4 new ones. Let's think about them. Let's take this under consideration before we just go say, yes, this is what we're gonna do. Where the funding coming from?
This does not include any funding, and it doesn't have to be funded.
Some money got to come somewhere to get it done, man. You know, some money got to come somewhere to get it done. You can't do nothing without money. You know, you can't do anything without money.
There are examples of well-functioning redevelopment authorities that have not been capitalized by the city. Now, in the future, the next board, perhaps a board after that, could reach a point where they determine it is in the city's best interest to fund the redevelopment authority. It is certainly not a necessity for the city to directly fund the redevelopment authority. Any further comments from the members of the board? Any further comments from the members of the board? All right, seeing none, that will conclude the public hearing on the redevelopment authority. And the next matter you have before you is the consideration of the approval of a resolution on the establishment of a redevelopment authority and the plan for the city of Starkville. Discussion.
I move approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve of the resolution on the establishment of a redevelopment authority and the corresponding redevelopment plan for the city of Starkville as presented. Alderman Dumas, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Parker. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of Alderman Dumas' motion, please signify by raising your hand. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand. By a vote of 2 in favor with 4 against, this measure fails. The next matter on the agenda is the consideration of the adoption of the Greensboro Street Historic District and District Standards.
Mayor, let me just say that I brought this up at the beginning of this term just because some of the citizens had brought it to my attention and I thought it was worth consideration. I do know that the Historic Preservation Commission, once formed, has met once a month for 4 years. I do know they've worked hard on this. And I do know there's been a lot of input on it. I've heard a lot of things said. I don't think there's anything I can say that's going to change anyone's opinion at this point. I do know that one of the things that's been asked is, do you live in the district? And I do not. But if I use that logic, then I also couldn't approve of zoning changes or the landscape ordinance we just did last time because those affect neighborhoods I'm not a part of. And so that said, I will move approval of the adoption of the Greensboro Street Historic District and the district standards.
Motion has been made by Alderman Corey to adopt the Greensboro Street Historic District and the district standards as presented. Alderman Corey, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Dumas. Alderman Corey, do you wish to speak on the merits?
Just one other thing. I may not live in the historic district, but I would love to. All right. That's it.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Alderman Corey's, Alderman Parker?
My opinion from the beginning has been that as I don't know, I guess I've asked as we've gone through this for some type of middle ground to where we are. I realize for the people that are adamantly for this project, the opt-in, opt-out is just isn't something that has gotten any traction at all. And I was even willing. I mean, once it was opted in, it was on the deed. It was always in. It could be, and then if somebody bought the property that wasn't in the zone, they could opt it in at that time. I feel like if we had some type of solution like that, then, and I do truly believe these are historic neighborhoods, and I think that the market or the people that buy those houses in those neighborhoods would eventually opt all those properties in. But I do have an issue with, we use the covenants of, I live in a neighborhood that has covenants, but our covenants in our neighborhood does not have the full weight of the city of Starkville and an ordinance to enforce that. We enforce it on ourselves, and that's why I've had a slight issue with it. I would like to see an opt-in, opt-out clause. I don't want to see the Historic Preservation Commission abolished. I think they've done outstanding work, and I truly believe these three neighborhoods are historic in our town. But there has not seemed to have been any negotiating or any moving, and that's I would have liked to have seen an opt-in, opt-out clause. I think over time, all of them would have been opted in. If it was truly a historic neighborhood and people were truly concerned about making it a historic neighborhood, people would have bought properties and opted all the properties in. I mean, in the case of Greensboro, if 75% of them opted in at the very beginning, that's going to lock the neighborhood up. There's not a lot of bad things can happen, and then over time, people are going to buy into that neighborhood, knowing that most of the neighborhood is in it, and then they can opt their property in. But to tell somebody that has an existing house that's been there for a long time that they have to meet some standards, and that's been the issue that I've had with it.
Further discussion. Alderman Sister.
I'll just say that while I understand exactly what you're saying, this is the issue always when you're trying to retrofit something.
Sure.
It's easy if you're building from the ground up and you're building things that are new and you can make everything exactly as you want them. When you try to retrofit, it's very difficult. I have seen sometimes on Greensboro, I didn't grow up here in Starkville, but I came to school here a long time ago, and I have seen sometimes on Greensboro where there were rundown, dilapidated properties. I know that there's some houses on Greensboro now that could use a little TLC. So this is one of those situations that's difficult. It's one of those situations where there does seem to be a neighborhood push to get something done, and I think it's incumbent, particularly upon Alderman Carver, to whose neighborhood this falls in, and Alderman Corey, whose neighborhoods these fall in, to listen to those people in your wards. There's not an easy solution here, but there does seem to be something that's very difficult to put together here in Starkville, which is a supermajority of people who want something. As we all know, that is incredibly difficult to accomplish, however you set about doing it.
Further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Alderman Corey's motion, please signify by raising your hand. Alderman Carver, was that a raise?
That's in support of this?
Yeah. All right, let's, all those in favor, raise your hand and keep it up. All those opposed, raise your hand and keep it up. Now, Alderman Dumas, was your hand raised for both, or?
No, it's raised for first.
We're gonna do this. Once and for all, if we don't get this right, we're doing roll calls from here on out. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand and keep it up. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand and keep it up. By a vote of 4 in favor with 2 against, this measure passes. The next matter on the agenda is the consideration of the adoption of the Nash Street Historic District and District Standards. Discussion.
Move approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Corey to approve the adoption of the Nash Street Historic District and District Standards. Alderman Corey, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Dumas. Alderman Corey, do you wish to speak on the merits?
Nope.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by raising your hand and keep it up. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand and keep it up. All right, the vote is 3-3. I will vote yay to break the tie. So by a vote of 3 in favor, 3 against, with the mayor breaking the tie, this measure passes. The next matter before you is a report from the city clerk and finance director regarding the Parks Commission audit. Mr. Adams?
Mayor,
Can we take a short recess?
Sure. Without objection, we'll move into a brief recess. Any objection? Any objection? Seeing none, we'll brief recess.
Thank you. Needed that.
I can. Okay. Sounds good. We can't start it. We don't have. Oh, wait, no. Yeah, we've got enough. Yeah, we have enough. Jeremiah, come on. Meeting will now come back to order. The next matter you have before you is a report from the city clerk on the Parks Commission audit.
I won't bog the board down with reading the reporter. As this has been out there for 4 weeks, I'm assuming everybody's familiar with what's in it. Like I said, what I've done here is stated the facts and simply the facts, making in an attempt to not steer the board in any direction, as obviously any decision that's made related to this issue is sort of at the board's discretion. With that, I'll take any questions.
Questions? Alderman Sister.
I have comments, not questions. This is one of those issues that we were talking about before, where one board hands something off cleanly or not cleanly to a next board. There are financial problems with the Parks Commission that I think are longer reaching than the few things that we've talked about or perhaps read about in the paper. So I'd like to just point out a couple of trends that are occurring there. I'd like to pull out a couple of numbers because the next board will have to deal with this. They'll have to deal with this. If you look at their financial statements from 2011 to 2012, you'll see that their operating cash is decreasing. Their accounts payables are increasing, which means that they are, rather than being able to pay bills, they are having to accrue them, and that's just cash that's going to have to come out of a future budget. This last audit, there were one-time revenues that were used, that were reported as current year revenues, which was an appropriate thing from an accounting perspective, but it leaves you with a somewhat if you're not careful in how you read that, you can misinterpret what it means. It sounds as if they had sufficient revenues to cover their expenses. They had sufficient revenues with that one-time donation that the parks received, but their operations don't reflect any changes that will go away next year when those non-recurring revenues go away. The audit pointed out that there were internal control issues, that there were other management issues related to the Parks Commission that need to be addressed. The parks have a guaranteed revenue stream from the city of $70,000 a month, $840,000 a year for operations. Their payroll and benefits and their electric bill are a little over $70,000 a month, but just based on averages. So it's going to be very difficult for them to provide services throughout the rest of this fiscal year, in that they don't have monies coming in. They have exhausted their 2% monies back in April or early May, monies that they have used for some of the summer things, loosely considered capital improvements. So there are issues at the parks, and I hope that the next board is prepared to deal with this. I had hoped that this board would take it on, that we would form a committee to look at this and figure out how we could potentially resolve some of these issues. I'm going to say that frequently got stymied in the names of us trying to do something political, when it's really an operational and a financial issue. It's not political, operational and financial. So their trending is bad from the perspective of looking at cash and accounts payable. There are findings in their audit that would indicate that you have problems, and it is something that this board, and when I say this board, I mean the board that's seated here, this board, the next board, cannot address with an autonomous body. Short of them also being willing to come to the table. To this point, there's been no willingness for them to come to the table, aside from the fact that they have indicated back in December, when we had our parks report, that they would be asking for an additional $120,000 from the board to true up their utility bill, because they had not budgeted their utilities or had not paid their utilities. That number's probably by the end of this year going to be more like $180,000 rather than $120,000. So for those of you that'll be on the board next term, that's something you're going to have to address. And I just want that to be clear, to know that it was something that I had been hopeful that this board, working with the Parks Commission, might have begun to address during this term, but we clearly cannot. We've just not been able to reach some sort of working relationship. And I think that's my only comment. Just be aware, know that that's one of those things rolling at you new board members. So.
Is there any further discussion on the topic?
I go. Mr. Kemp. Mr. Kemp, you still back there? On that, when we put those lights on Dale King Park, does those lights tie in with that? Who split it? Who split it at the Park and Rec, and the city split it that funded?
No, it was based on the way I was given the Park and Rec money to do that. Kind of similar to like the same lights that were set up over on the sportsplex over at the soccer field. It's based under a lighting investment on ownership, and then the Park and Rec would pay a monthly charge associated with that with the energy part of it. That's the way it was set up.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, the next matter you have before you is calling for a public hearing to repeal the enabling ordinance for the Historic Preservation Commission. Discussion. Alderman Vaughn.
Yes, sir. Make a motion to call for the public hearing.
Alderman Vaughn has made a motion to call for a public hearing on the repeal of the enabling ordinance for the Historic Preservation Commission. Alderman Vaughn, is that your motion?
Yes, it is.
Do I hear a second? Do I hear a second? Do I hear a second? Hearing no second, motion fails for lack of a second. The next matter on the agenda is the request for approval of the City of Starkville claims docket for all departments except for the fire department as of June 13th.
Move approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve of the City of Starkville claims docket for all departments except for the fire department as of June 13th, 2013. Alderman Dumas, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Corey. Alderman Dumas, do you wish to speak on the merits?
I do not.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
By a vote of 4 in favor with 1 against, this measure passes. The next matter on the agenda, a motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve of the report of the receipts and expenditures for the period ending May 31st, 2013, in accordance with Section 21-35-13 of the Mississippi Code annotated. Alderman Dumas, as presented. Alderman Dumas, that's your motion? It is. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion's been seconded by Alderman Sistrunk. Alderman Dumas, you wish to speak on the merit? Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
By a vote of 4 in favor with 1 against, this measure passes. The next matter on the agenda is the request for approval to hire Walter A. Sanders to fill the vacant position of city planner.
I move
Discussion.
approval.
Motion has been made by Alderman Dumas to approve of the hire of Walter A. Sanders to fill the vacant position of city planner. Alderman Dumas, is that your motion?
It is.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Motion has been seconded by Alderman Parker. Alderman Dumas, you wish to speak on the merits?
No.
Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
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 All right. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. All those opposed, please signify by raising your hand. By a vote of 3 in favor with 2 against, this measure passes. And that concludes the agenda. You have no executive session scheduled for this evening.
Move that we adjourn until July the 2nd, 2013 at 5:30 at 101 Lampkin Street in City Hall.
A motion has been made by
Second.
Alderman Dumas to adjourn for the final time in this term until July 2nd, 2013 at 5:30 at 101 Lampkin Street in the City Hall courtroom. Alderman Dumas, that's your motion?
It is.
And do I hear a second?
Second.
Alderman Vaughn. Motion's been seconded by Alderman Vaughn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
I want to stay here.
We stand
You two ladies don't run off. Hey, you two ladies don't run off.
So much. Me too. Learned a lot.
Join you by phone.
Let me know when you're ready to run.
Okay.
Need all of it, I can enjoy all your free time.
Oh, we are, yeah, we're actually, we just sold our house. So, man, how about you? You wanna go with Steve, though?
Yes, sir. Enjoyed it very much.
You see Steve on the, man, I saw
Oh,
you.
right. I'll see you around.
It's just right. Good luck to you.
I'll be happy to.
Are you in the
Thank you very much.
Were you pleased that I finally voted my yard?
No, I'm going with you.
Oh, come on. But I got my 6-inch grass, but it didn't get mowed for a month.
I'll be by.
Oh, yeah. So there's nothing that prohibits it.
So basically, you know, it's dead right now, but it's not 2 years. That's what I'm enjoying.
Yeah, it's a matter like anything else.